Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Gist, a new limited series powered by Energy Central. I'm Energy Central Community Manager and your host for this series, Matt Chester. We're glad you pressed play, but you might be wondering, why create this limited series in the first place? What is so special about GIS? Well, before we welcome our first guest, let me explain. The market for Global Geographic Information Systems, aka GIS, in the utility industry is growing at an annual rate of nearly 20% over the next 5 years. The incremental growth from now until 2029 is slated to clock in at $3.5 billion. And 37% of that global growth is expected to come from North America. So, we are at an inflection point for this important and vital technology. It's getting bigger, bolder, and more impactful with each passing year. And our team heard this from the Energy Central community. You want to know how this GIS tech is permanently altering the modern power grid. Over the course of the next few weeks, you'll hear from a wide array of experts, thought leaders, and utility executives about the future of the fast-paced technological innovation that is GIS. We'll cover GIS's role in the digital transformation, the ways GIS is impacting the clean energy transition, the future of smart asset management fueled by GIS and mapping, and what the future holds for utility pros leveraging this tech. We're covering a lot in this first-of-its-kind limited series, and we hope you'll stick around to learn with us. So for our first episode, we've got a fantastic primer on all things GIS for utilities with a wonderful guest, Jazzmen Wilson, host of the GIS Chat podcast. On her show, Jazzmen interviews professionals who work in utilities, as well as conservation, mining, cartography, programming, design, project management, and so many more exciting areas. All proof that GIS really is everywhere and in every sector. We're thrilled to have Jazzmen on The Gist today, and we can't wait to dig into all things GIS with her. So, without further ado, let's get into the interview. Jazzmen, welcome to The Gist.
Thank you for inviting me, Matt. I'm excited to have our conversation. I'm also excited to be your first guest. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm excited to kind of get into this and kind of talk about what I've learned in the utility industry, and plus, people that I've had on the show, what they've said. But yeah, excited to be here.
Excellent. No, we're excited too. And so let's kick it off with a very, very broad question to set us up for getting more granular and detailed, not only today, but in the coming weeks on this limited series. Can you explain for us briefly what GIS is in its most basic definition?
So GIS is, and that's usually the question I get when I tell people what I'm doing. They have no idea what that is. But in its basic form, Geographic Information Systems is a way to analyze, predict, manipulate any type of geography-based data. So essentially, GIS is a way that we're able to access data attached to a unique location, hence the geography and the science. A lot of people use GIS for, in this instance, utilities for data management. We'll use data management to be able to locate our assets in it and be able to pull those assets onto a map, hence the cartography side of it. I guess for a lot of people, when they ask me what is GIS, initially I tell them, think of Google Maps. Data is attached to a certain location, and then that location is then pulled by our GIS, or Geographic Information Science, and then it's able to locate that information. So really, GIS is a way for us to present to either the GIS people who are like me, or clients, stakeholders, customers, a visualization of certain data sets that we have on a map. And I guess that's GIS in a very small nutshell. It's much larger than that, but that's kind of what I tell people.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And then, so in what industries do you see GIS technology being most impactful? Where is it currently making the most waves?
GIS is making waves pretty much everywhere. So I wouldn't say a particular industry. I would say that any industry that doesn't have GIS finds out very, very soon after how important GIS is beneficial for their industry. And especially GIS in terms of budget is worth it, because I feel like a lot of people who don't have GIS in their company or budget plan, they realize that they're wasting a lot of money. They realize that they're dealing with a lot of redundancy, and GIS is useful for a lot of companies, let's say mining, animation, military, design. Actually, GIS was used in Zootopia, fun fact. But that can go into another subject. NGOs, EMS. So a lot of these companies are using GIS to be able to map and visualize their data. And historically, let's say it's had a huge impact with surveyors, for instance, which is kind of a dying breed, unfortunately, but that's another tangent. But GIS is most impactful for a lot of industries once they're able to use it, because they're able to say, oh, okay, now I can actually see where where our assets are. We're able to see where this location is, or we're able to use GIS to map this AI visualized world. And that's why I brought up Zootopia. So GIS has been most impactful for all industries across many companies and in industries around the world. And then companies that don't use GIS, like I said, find out that it is very impactful.
Yeah, that's fascinating to see kind of the wide breadth. And then obviously for our Energy Central community, it begs the question, well, what about utilities? Why does GIS matter to this energy and utility sector?
I graduated in 2022 from ASU with a bachelor's in GIS. And so I'm pretty new to it. But from my last 2.5 years in it, one of the biggest things that I've noticed, and also interviewing people on my show, is the deviation from paper is how utilities have been able to utilize GIS. So when I talked about earlier about redundancy, back in the day with utilities, what they'd have to do is map out everything by hand. They'd have to constantly print out paper and just do the same map over and over again if there were any changes. And then you have a lot of manpower because of having to deal with the paper and having to redraw everything. Something changes, we have to go back to the drawing board. Upwards to maybe 50 people working on one thing, and that's what they have to do every day. Now you have a GIS technician, and they can just do this work on their computer and able to actually transfer all that information on a map onto a computer system, hence the GIS. So I would say that's something that's been very impactful for a lot of utility companies. And I think the biggest problem from what I've heard and what I see is that I think the shift, because you have a lot of people who are in the utility industry who are kind of used to everything being on paper, and making that shift, I think has kind of been, I think the hardest change for a lot of them. But I would say that's the biggest thing amongst deviating from paper and going to digital. Also just be able to manage our assets a lot better.
Yeah, no, and that rings true that the utility sector is notoriously one where inertia is big and when adopting, new processes, new technologies. So, in your conversations where you've talked to people in and around the utility sector, were there any examples that jumped out as those who are really leveraging GIS to its fullest capacity? And if so, what does that fullest capacity even really look like?
I would say that all of them are using it about the same way, but I would say that, for instance, here's an example. Journeymen or foremen, the people who are out on the field doing the hard work. And by the way, like, everyone, please be nice to the guys that you see with the orange cones. I get it. It's frustrating. I work for a utility company and I still get mad when I see those orange cones because it's causing a lot of havoc. But those guys are doing a lot of great work. So one thing that I've noticed is that, for instance, like I said, going from paper to digital, mobile tablets on the ground, able to just adjust or change it on your phone or on a tablet, and it instantly gets sent to our GIS system, and we're able either to change, it's either changed in real time, or they can just send it in and just say, hey, we just need this changed, and that's then and there. There's no need to do it out in the field and then have to come all the way back and then have to get that information sent. And there's just so much wasted time, hours into that. And I think that from my experience, a lot of utility companies have said kind of the same thing, which is how that has helped them deviate into more of having a system with GIS and not kind of being archaic with having everything just being manual. With every utility company I've talked to, they've all kind of had like the same parallel thought, which is deviation from paper, ease of access, real-time data, being able to archive that data easily. Because before you had folders, right? And there's something that even like at SRP, we had to manually change from doing one process from a folder, putting it all onto a system digitally, especially because of COVID. I feel like COVID kind of helped kind of move that people in that direction to where we realized that we could do a lot of things remotely and digitally. And so I think that has been a process for a lot of companies, whether it's utility, county, what have you, getting everything that's on paper and scanning it over to our system, which has helped tons of people in a lot of ways.
Sure. Yeah, no, and it's interesting that it could be such a common experience. And, my mind goes to the fact that the utility sector, it's a pretty diverse one in terms of many different sizes of utilities, different makeups, rural versus urban. Do you hear differences in how various utilities might be approaching GIS and adopting the technology based on those differences between them?
In general, it's affordable, but the larger the company, the easier it is to implement that because you can also hire people and get more techs who are specialized in that. I think that the smaller the company, the more rural, I think that they are less likely to have that implemented and probably just doing something that's more manual or doing it on paper. But I mean, you have some free GIS software like QGIS, for instance, or GRASS, where it does take a while to learn because it's not going to be like Esri, where a lot of people know what Esri is, but you do have to pay for that. You have to pay for that enterprise package, which some people just don't have the money for. But there are affordable ways to do it. So I think that the size definitely impacts who's going to use the software for sure. And there's a lot of cost to that. It's very beneficial. And honestly, I think it pays for itself over time. But a lot of people don't even know how to use it. And then that's where you have to kind of either train people, which costs money, or you have to bring in someone who already has that information, but they're going to cost money as well. So the more rural and the smaller, I don't think they're probably using GIS in that sense, but they are using GIS in other ways, right? They can, I mean, even just mapping something on a paper is a form of GIS. You can go back to John Snow and cholera, where you're just like mapping something on a piece of paper, and that's GIS. So GIS doesn't have to necessarily be digital. It could be something simple, like just writing it down and transferring it. Now, that time, cost, all of that may be a little bit higher in the grand scheme of things. But yes, that was a whole tangent because I was thinking about a guest I had on the show because she's a consultant and she goes out and helps people who don't know anything about GIS, but because that she has the information, she's able to help them out in that way. But they're like smaller companies. But yeah, I would say that the larger the company, the higher chance that they are using bigger products like Esri. The smaller the company, they're probably using more of a manual way of GIS, but still GIS ultimately.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating that the technology itself can look, different ways depending on where you are, who you are. And, I'm assuming part of that is also over time as well. Can you talk to us about how the way that utilities have leveraged GIS technology, how has that changed over the years? And can you contextualize the technological innovations we're talking about and that the trajectory that's taken?
Yeah. So I would say that, I mean, like I said about the paper thing, but I would say that technology, for instance, like being able to integrate, I mean, some companies are using Esri, some people are using proprietary systems to, be able to produce these products. I would say that technologically though, I mean, everything's getting smaller. That's something that I've noticed recently is like, for instance, like GPS and surveyors or people like Blue Stake. Before, they used to have like really large equipment to have to carry around and lug around to be able to capture this data. And one of my guests who works for this GPS company, I'm going to name drop, called Bad Elf. They're a cool company. They basically are able to create everything to be smaller and mini to where it's easy, like a phone, to where you're able to just track information on your phone. And really, a phone uses GIS as well. You can use GPS on your phone as well. But I would say that technologically, like everything's gotten smaller. And then also the use of AI, which we can talk about later, that's starting to move into like geo AI. Now there's some controversy with that, some good and some bad, but that's something that utility companies and other companies as well are leveraging, is the use of AI into their systems and processes, where it becomes a little bit more easier. And then, being able to have programmers, let's say, to manage all of these softwares and all these upkeeps. Now that we're going to deviate from paper, which is going to happen. Some people may not like that, but it will happen. That just makes more sense. That now we're looking into AI, we're looking into making things more tangible and more easier to carry around, easier to access, easier to walk around with. And then more real-time data, for instance. Like I know a lot of utility companies are using real-time data to try to make it as quick and seamless as possible without having delays in their data sets, to where everyone can get access to that, not just GIS, but other departments in the company.
Yeah, and so this pace of the technology, you talk about going from the paper maps to the tablets and then the tablets to the smaller tech. These are huge technological jumps at each time. Can we expect that pace to keep up? I mean, you mentioned AI. That seems like another giant leap forward. So what does that kind of pace of the technology look like?
Absolutely. That pace is rapidly growing. So it's not necessarily like a pace we can keep up with. It's actually a pace that is, can we get with the demand? Can we keep up with demand for that? It's going to happen. And it's more or less like a need and necessity. So with GeoAI, for instance, And I don't particularly use GeoAI in my everyday, but I've interviewed people who do use it. And I mean, efficacy, for instance, has just increased substantially with using GeoAI. And especially because depends on like who you are and what you're using it for. GeoAI may not be good for certain careers in GIS because I feel like that could potentially, make some people lose out of what they do every day. Depends on what you do. If you're like a data management person, you may lose your job to GeoAI. If you're a surveyor, you may start to see that field dwindle. But then it has good use cases for people who are using like a programmer. Every programmer I have talked to has said that they love AI and it's made their job way easier. It's not going to be able to replace certain things like cartography and stuff like that. It could replace some things, but it's not really going to. I don't know. I feel like a lot of people like kind of like that human touch with cartography. So I don't know if that's going to go anywhere. But, I never say never. But really that in terms of keeping up with the pace is being kept up with everyone, not just utilities. Everyone is keeping up with it. And it's more or less like where I don't see anyone going back in any sense of how GIS used to be utilized. It's moving forward, and it's moving forward at a rapid pace. So I'm not worried about the pace of it at all.
No, and I kind of want to stay on the AI for GIS. And can you kind of break it down a little bit more tangibly about what tasks it's able to do and the advantages it gives? And then, we talked about, where there might be trepidation with it, and we mentioned earlier, the utility industry is known for its inertia. Is there some, a push and pull between the we should adopt it versus let's take it slow and see what the good and bad of it all is?
I think that'll depend on who you talk to. I see the good and bad in it. I definitely have had people who are very much against it, and for very good reason, because it has the potential to kind of take away that human touch or that human capability, and it may not be able to access or process certain information. I actually did talk to someone who is a surveyor, and he was saying like the AI kind of missed certain key points that only a human would have seen. And then you have the other side, like I said, like programmers or people who teach it, or people who use it in their everyday to where it makes their process a lot faster. So instead it's cut their process from 4 hours to 2 hours. And that's a lot of industries as well, not just GIS, that it's kind of helped them out a lot. I do think that we are going to go into Geo AI though. I do think that's probably going to be the future, good or bad. I think that'll be the future that we'll be going towards. And I do think that it is going to help increase efficacy. And I think it's going to increase the process. And then we can put our attention to other things. So we're not putting it on one product. We're able to put the AI onto that, and it's able to do the work, whatever you ask it. And I hear that this is just Chat GPT, but I guess apparently, you're nice to it, it'll be nice to you, which is interesting. Me and a couple of coworkers were talking about that the other day. But that's another tangent. With that, I think that technologically, though, that GIS is going to be, I just wish it was kind of known a lot more by other people, because I don't feel like a lot of people even know what GIS is. So even like when I just told you that it was used in Zootopia, you're kind of like, well, what would that be used for? And GeoAI was used in that sense. Or we're using GIS to capture information and be able to put that information onto whatever software that they use for that movie, and then able to capture it in that film. And you wouldn't know that GIS was used for that. And then, like, of course, NASA, oceanography, conservation, using GIS to, actually a quick example, or I was talking about NGOs, is that I did have one person on my show, and he works with like FEMA, and he actually lives in South Africa. And I can't pronounce the name of it, but the actual name of it's called Doctors Without Borders. And, him able to go in certain areas and to map on so this is an example of using both, to map on his paper about, like, let's say hypothetically, like nearest radius of bathrooms or nearest radius to the closest, hospital or any food deserts, and then able to capture that data and then be able to transfer it onto his computer. That's an example of using like a mixture there. But moving forward, I do think that when we are talking about the use case of technology, I think that we're going to be going in that direction for sure. Now, do I think we're going to get rid of everything manual? Not the case, unless we're able to use, like, let's say remote sensing and be able just to like pinpoint where we need to go. Don't know if we're going to get there just yet. I think we're still going to have a mixture of both. But yeah, I think the future is great with GIS. And I think that the mere fact that we're even I love any job where I can just work from home. So GIS allows you just to be able to work from home. I don't have to go into the office. I mean, I do go into the office hybrid, but I could work from home. It's not something that requires you to be in the office all the time. And that's where technology has kind of brought us into. And that goes back to COVID. We're kind of shifted us into that direction. And it actually is the reason why I went to GIS. Around COVID is when I actually changed my career into GIS. Originally, I was going into wildlife biology, and then 2020 hit, and I realized that actually the world was changing into a more of an IT or tech space. So that's actually where I found GIS and decided to go into that because it's the mixture of both art and science.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned wishing that more people kind of knew and understood GIS, and also the fact that maybe some of the GIS professionals are able to work remotely, which leads me to wonder, how is functionally GIS integrated into utility teams? Is there one central GIS team who kind of does it all, or does the tech impact various teams across the enterprise?
So that also is another thing that goes back to the size of the company. So the bigger the size of the company, the larger team you're going to have. A lot of smaller companies, they usually a lot of times will have maybe one GIS person who wears many hats. And then that one GIS person or that team of GIS people, they are the ones who are using it usually the most, but everyone's using it, everyone's seeing it for their own purposes. I mean, like, again, that goes back to it in the beginning where I was saying, like, going back to stakeholders, clients, customers, they all need to be able to see that representation of the GIS that you produce visually on a map, whether that's for a presentation or whether that's to show a client or a customer, hey, this is where everything is laid out in a design that you've created. And they're able to see that and conceptualize where everything is geographically. But everyone leverages GIS in their company, and that's just for different uses. Now, the management of GIS is, of course, kept up by the GIS people. And hats off to anyone who's like this, like the one-man team. Because I've met a couple, and I just give them complete props that they are literally the only person that knows about the GIS, and they're wearing every hat imaginable, and they're doing it by themselves. So props to them. But I work with a team, so I don't have to do that. But yeah, everyone's using it because, I mean, even though I'm doing my day-to-day or I'm doing my managing of it, I can go to a different department and they're looking at something that I mapped, but they're using it for their own use case. Or someone else who's a different department may use this map to show a customer, hey, this is where your contract is, or this is in the realm of your contract. This is what it's going to look like overhead, underground, stuff like that. So everyone uses it. The management is by the GIS, but everyone in the company is going to leverage your work.
And so then let's talk about some of the key players in the industry. Who are the names that we really should know in GIS, and what are the recurring utilities, providers, tech companies that come up on your show?
In terms of the big names, like people, they're able to look up these names. We have John Nelson, who's like the map guy. We have Dawn Wright. She's a chief scientist at Esri and oceanographer, amazing woman. They're both amazing. And then you have other people as well. I mean, I know that a lot of these people, they're big names and they're awesome, but I almost kind of look at them as a little bit more like I think it's amazing, like everything that they've done, but I also just wanted people to kind of be able to relate to just like a person doing a 9-to-5 as well. That isn't, on the papers. And I feel like those people are just as awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's similar to what we were saying earlier with the linemen and the people with the orange cones. They're the ones doing the work to make the industry run. And, even if you have the CEOs of the utility companies, you ask them, they would say the same thing as, those people who are ostensibly just doing their job, but they're doing a job that keeps the grid humming. So I love the approach of, giving them the spotlight because their work is important and they're driving it forward for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I still get mad when I see cones for sure, but I try to give myself grace. And I'm like, they're just doing your job, Jazzmen. It's fine.
A good reminder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So as we look ahead to a run of episodes, we're going to be covering a ton: grid mod, asset management, sustainability, and more. So I want to pose this question to you. What do you think the future of GIS looks like for utilities? What are both the exciting developments we can expect in the next year or two, and then what are the more pie in the sky developments that we might see 10 plus years out?
Definitely, I would say, like I mentioned before, GeoAI is definitely where everything's going. But also solar and renewable energy. A lot of utility companies are implementing that and have like some 10, 15, 20, 30, 40-year goal or plan for the renewable energy and trying to get away from, generations that are emitting emissions and stuff like that. Honestly, I think those are only two things I could think of currently, is that I'm realizing that a lot of them are going into more of a GeoAI space. A lot of them are focusing on renewable energy and solar energy and trying to reach whatever goal that they're trying to do to trying to get there. In the next 10 years, though, I'm going to say that I am still a novice in this industry. So I wouldn't know what the next 10 years is because I've not been 10 years in it yet. But from what I've seen just so far, I would say those are the two that I've noticed a lot consistently with anyone that I've talked to, is that they're always moving in those two directions, is what I've seen. And I think that's at least the next 10 years, in my opinion, plus whatever else that I don't know about is, I think, the future of GIS for the next decade.
Wonderful. Well, we hope on our show to start to cover what that future will be, and hopefully you can tune into that.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Jazzmen, we want to thank you again so much for joining The Gist and sharing your expertise with our community. We're excited to keep the conversation going, and we've got plenty more episodes headed your way with super smart people literally building the future of energy. So do not miss an episode of The Gist. Hit subscribe to this feed, share an episode with a friend or coworker, and head to Energy Central for even more insights on this tech moving the power industry forward. And we'll see you next week for more.